Good afternoon, good morning, good evening. Thank you everyone for joining us. It's a wonderful privilege to see so many faces from around the globe joining us for the Courageous Conversation series. My name is John North. I'm based in the Garden Route of South Africa, and I work with the Globally Responsible Leadership Initiative. It's been nearly 20 years since the inquiry that kickstarted the Globally Responsible Leadership Initiative took place. And the work of the GRLI and what we stand for is very much in contrast with the global context where responsibility in leadership and practice is sadly not yet the norm. The impact of the grand challenges that we face collectively are growing more evident by the day. It encroaches on the very livelihood of people and planet. And there is urgent and radical work to be done to bring this emergent paradigm of global responsibility to prominence, to help shift the collective consciousness from I to we to all of us. In the management education landscape in particular, we see an increasingly crowded playing field of networks and initiatives focused on advancing responsible leadership and responsible management education, of course. And that's encouraging in itself, but we also know that espoused and lived values don't always correlate. So it may be a little tricky for the wider landscape of business schools and management educators and learning and development practitioners to discern the heavy lifting work from those who pay lip service to this work. And I believe that this is where the unique work and approach of the GRLI is invaluable. We're an independent, partner-driven initiative that is focused first and foremost on the impact of this ongoing inquiry, and only then on the survival of the entity per se. We remain uniquely positioned to challenge the status quo, to work with the hard questions for which there are no easy answers. And in a context where borders, boundaries, and divides are increasingly seen and felt, the GRI, I believe, manages to work beyond its logo. Over the years, the initiative of the GRI has sparked wide-ranging impact on teaching, learning, research, accreditation, rankings, and more. And of course, the conversation that we're going to be engaging in today is one small part of that. It is really, again, my privilege to welcome you to the Courageous Conversation. Just briefly, I want to remind our partners and associates that we have a debrief meeting on our shared module, which has been delivered over the last 2 months. What we've done is we set up a very innovative and global collaborative course that is taught by faculty from 7 different GRLI partner and associate organizations in Asia, Europe, and the Americas. It's titled Global Responsibility for Sustainable Transformation. And this team-taught course involved close to 50 students from around the globe. And they also collaborated on shared projects. And we will be looking back on what we've learned about this pilot initiative when we meet tomorrow. And of course, we're looking ahead at doing it again. A number of the institutions are already interested in offering the next intake of this global shared module. So if you're interested in that, just drop me a note or put a message in the chat and I'll send you more details. I would also like to remind you that we will be reconvening our Deans and Directors cohort in person. We have a date set for 7 to 10 September, kindly hosted by Antwerp Management School. And then again at the end of January by the University of Sharjah, which is the leading institution in the UAE focused on issues of sustainability. A reminder, if you're a dean or a director of a center or a head of learning and development who would like to engage in the Deans and Directors cohort, please do get in touch. And I think that is it for the advertisements. I'm going to hand over to Lana Jelenjev and to Chris Taylor and to Skeena Rathor to take us into the courageous conversation. Thank you very much.
Thanks, John. It's great to see everyone. Thank you all for showing up at whatever time of day it is where you are. It's great to see you all. So I just want to say a few words to locate us. This is the second courageous conversation we've held, and the theme is, across all of them, is hope in the time of collapse. So last time we framed the current global situation as the potential collapse of civilization as we've known it up till this point, due to the environmental and social crises that are colliding at this point. And we framed it as a transition from the closure of one system, the dying of one system, and the birthing of another system. And that's the conversation that we want to carry on today. So we've invited Skeena Rathor, whose title is Being the Change. So you know who she is. Maybe you want to wave, Skeena. Yeah, great. And Skeena and I have worked together for 3 years or more at the forefront of the kind of climate and ecological emergency, trying to think about what is the system that can replace or is replacing the system that we're in, that is in decline currently. And so we wanted to have that conversation with you. And Lana's going to hold us through the breakout rooms and through the discussion that we'll all have as a group at the end. So the format is roughly a third of the time in conversation with Skeena, myself and Lana in conversation with Skeena. Then we'll move into breakout groups for roughly a third of the time, and then we'll come back together as a whole just to hear your reflections and insights. And the idea about the initial conversation with Skeena is just to give you some kind of stimulus to catalyze the discussion in your breakout groups. And what we're really interested in is harvesting what you're seeing where you are in the world about what's dying and what's being born at the current time. So does that sound okay to everyone? Just give me a bit of a nod or a wave. Great. Okay, good. So Skeena, let's bring you in. I know that before we dive into the conversation, that you've adopted a practice that you wanted to share with us all to ground us and bring us all together before we dive into the conversations.
I do, and I've run out of candles. And Chris, I wondered if you had a candle nearby.
Yikes.
Whether I could say the words and we could use your candle. Hello, by the way, and salam and shalom. I'm from a Kashmiri Sufi heritage. And so just presencing myself in that way with you all. This practice is a practice known in a number of indigenous cultures and traditions. It is known as the children's fire, the lighting of the children's fire. And the invitation is for us to use this space to be in presence, in presence, in alignment, and in service to the children of all species for the next seven generations, for their life force and their love force, our ancestors of future. So that's the dedication, that's the invitation. So Chris, if you're ready, are you ready?
I am, and I managed to find a candle.
Yeah, fantastic.
In my bottom drawer.
May this space live with and live from the life force and the love force of the next 7 generations of children of all species. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'll keep the candle burning while we're in conversation here.
Thanks.
And I think this is a ritual that is not unknown to the GRLI as well, because I think Matt McCarthy introduced this at the GRLI gathering in Stellenbosch several years ago.
Yes,
Wonderful.
the children's fire, yes. Indeed.
Yeah, so it's nice to have it resurrected here. Good. So what I wanted to do, Skeena, was just to start by saying a little bit about how we met. Skeena and I met through Extinction Rebellion in the UK, which exploded onto the scene 3 or 4 years ago as a response to the climate and ecological emergency, and has been spearheading kind of non-violent civil disobedience since then. But I think it's fair to say that Skeena and I both came into the movement, and we met and have worked together because we were both, I think, interested in thinking about the vision for the future. So rather than feeling that we were fighting against something or opposing something, we wanted to be in a space where we were thinking about what is the system that could replace the system that is bringing us to the brink of ecological collapse. What might that look like? What might the world look like if we could shift the system? And so we were in a part of Extinction Rebellion that was called Vision Sensing, and we were trying to sense into the vision of the future and what was emerging. So I wonder, Skeena, whether there's a way into that, into over those 3 years, what did you sense that is emerging in the world, that is a kind of, that is shifting the paradigm for us?
Yeah, thank you, Chris. And just to say, Chris and I have had such fun together. It's been a rollicking journey, as serious as it sounds as well. So it's interesting that, Chris, you said systems all the way through, and then the last word you said paradigm. Yeah. I'm going to read Donella Meadows. She's a system thinker and scientist. You may know her work. The most effective point to intervene in a system is the mindset or paradigm out of which the system, its goals, power structure, rules, its culture arises. Yeah. So I'd love to think about it like that, because what we found in XR was we were recreating some of the behaviors of the system, right? I think you'd say that was, you'd agree, Chris, that that was what was going on. And within a year after the October 2019 rebellion, so XR burst onto the scene in October 2018, we grew so fast in that year, so fast, in a speed we couldn't really catch up with ourselves with. And we were on the back foot with creating systems that could support the organism, the decentralized network system that is XR. And by October 2019, there was an implosion of sorts. There was high states of conflict and tension in the movement. And Chris, you'll remember that we tried to organize a closing ceremony. And so part of the vision teams, one of the roles and responsibilities we carried was to be organizing opening and closing spaces of rebellion. And we couldn't, we were at a kind of hornlock situation with many of the circles who were, yeah, very upset with each other. And it really affected how we could run this closing and caused much despair. Yeah, that feels for me, Chris, where we suddenly realized that it wasn't a sudden realization, it was a growing realization, but it was then very crystalline and very clear that if you were to describe hope, let's say for a moment, as a visionary culture, yeah, then what was that, first of all? What was that visionary? What culture and what paradigm are we imagining? And how do we start to move towards that and start to become that? So I'm just tracking that. I'm not sure I'm tracking your question very well. So I wonder if, and it's probably because I'm wanting to say some things and you're, but I'd love to just bring it back to you, Chris, so that we can move a little bit more together.
Yeah, thank you. And maybe Lana might want to jump in at some point as well. And I think, so what you're pointing towards, I think, is the difficulty of trying to get into a mindset of a new paradigm when you're in systems and structures and power dynamics and fractious relationships that are born of an old paradigm. And this kind of, how do you actually do that? How do you get above the fray to find a new mindset? But I think what I loved about where you ended up in that is that you found part of that through the notion of co-liberation, which I experienced as a system of how do we, you as a woman of Kashmiri and Sufi heritage from a colonized country, and me as a white man from a colonizing country, how can we meet in some way? And how is our liberation interdependent? And how do we get through that? And I think you came up with some interesting practices around that, and some pillars, the 4 pillars that are kind of part of co-liberation, that I think started to lift us into a new mindset. So maybe there's something in there that you might want to share.
Sure, thank you, Chris. Yeah, so in that despair of going, what's happened to our movement, in October, there was this self-reflection and this critique to make of what we were doing, and in terms of repeating the systemic behaviors of this paradigm. And how do we break through and break free? And so I think what really helped, and I don't know how it is for you amazing people on this call, but we did have this background called our principles and values, and they were our vision, essentially. Principle and value number 1 was a vision. We have a shared vision for change. And then we had a paragraph of what that is. And then we had 9 other, what we called principles and values. Actually, all of them together embody a vision. And it's so vital, I think, that there's a place in every organization, community, network, right? Any place where there's a shared whole towards something, a shared sense making towards something, that there is a coherence and a coalescing around a vision, because a vision is an intention as well. It's our futurizing. It's how we make our reality become in terms of how we want it. And the Aborigines, I think, give us a clue when they say there's an Aboriginal law that says it is the heart's intention that makes manifest. And that we are beings, right, of heart. We have these incredible minds in service. One way to describe the mind, Ian McGilchrist's work, is really interesting when he talks about the right brain and left brain and the hemispheres, and how perhaps the left hemisphere is an emissary of the master, which is the right. But I would say also perhaps The mind is an emissary of our whole sense of knowing, and especially our heart sense of knowing. How do you choose your partner? From the heart. How do you choose your home? Usually it's a heart from the heart. Big decisions come from that inspiration of the heart. That was what really then gave birth to this work, that sense making, that is also a spiritual practice for me and has been a professional practice of learning around trauma and trauma integration and the way mind, body, brain behave and learn and change. So co-liberation is using that very much some amazing Western scientific knowledge around brain and body and heart development and learning, as well as ancient wisdom that many of us carry in our cells, actually. All of us, I would say, carry that in our cell, that cellular knowledge of what it is to be human and what it is to rehumanize, remember who we really are. That's the shift, right? We've designed systems and structures that are essentially dehumanizing and degenerative. There's lots of D words in where we've arrived at this moment, which is more than a crisis, which is more than an emergency. It's an existential cliff top. So then we can really look, when it's Cassandra Veaton of the Noetics Institute, she says, we're in a near-death moment. We're in a near-death moment. And when the story, the very familiar story of a near-death moment where you've left your body and there looks like something beautiful that you could walk towards, right? There's a strong presence and a strong light there that feels like it's pulling you. But you could make a decision about going back. Near-death experiences are often described as this. But you know that if you go back, everything is going to, everything will change. It's the Charles Dickens story of Scrooge, isn't it? Really, everything is going to change. So it's that we're in. And so in co-liberation, what we've said is, okay, and it's, again, I just want to thank Valerie Kaur, and where she says, what if this is not the darkness of the tomb, but the darkness of the womb? She runs something called Revolutionary Love. And I think it is. And so in going back, there's a rebirthing. And then there's figuring out together between us all our greatest imaginings around rehumanizing and becoming a regenerative presence in the circle of life. You know, can Homo sapiens, and do we really want to rejoin the circle and the web of life in a regenerative way? And co-liberation is making some really hard, fast guesses at what that means with our pathways and the dimensions of work. And what's crucial to say, Chris, and then I'll stop, is that co-liberation, it's not an anti-something. It's not an anti-racism or an anti-colonialism or an anti-patriarchal training or frame. It's the co-creating of this new paradigm. And in that way, it's not a self-development course or a CPD or a can we be better place, or can I be better? It asks you to make, and this is crucial, working agreements and systemic agreements, right? Of change, of how you practice your daily life in those dimensions of being that you exist in, the inner, the intra, the systemic, the biospheric, and the noospheric. Those are the 5 dimensions. And it asks you categorically to commit to working agreements and systemic agreements. So it's very exciting. It's potentially superbly powerful in that way. And it moves us from this frame of being anti to being could we possibly dare to dream to be non-racist and non-patriarchal? And when you said, Chris, sorry, I did say last point, this really is the last one. When you said, I'm from a colonizer, you're speaking from a colonizer. Well, in modern history, yes, in colonial history, yes. But we're all this system colonizes us, colonizes our thinking, it colonizes our way of doing things. And then actually, if you go back to the Sumerians, the first big colonizers, we're all colonized peoples. So there's something to recognize about that.
Thanks. So what if I try and track some of that back? And I'm wondering, Lana, whether you might want to jump in here too. But I guess what I'm hearing is that the paradigm that we're in and the mindset that we're in is a dehumanizing and destructive kind of mindset. And that what you're inviting us into or calling for is a kind of a rehumanization. I think somebody put that in the chat. What would it mean to rehumanize? And that almost is the key to discovering the kind of the system, is that we rehumanize ourselves and we step into a space where together we try and co-create the future.
Yeah.
As a species that becomes regenerative to the planet, regenerative to each other, and regenerative to the planet. And that replaces a kind of a degenerative and destructive system. And I'm just, because of time, I'm just wondering whether the 3 of us, between us, Lana, Skeena, and I, can just try and make that really concrete. So in very concrete terms, where are we seeing that starting to emerge? In the places that we move, what are the kind of early indications of this kind of move to regeneration? I don't know, Lana, do you want to kick off?
I can, first of all, Tina, thank you for, I've been taking notes and I've also posted it here in the chat. One of the things that really resonated the most with me is the importance of inviting imagination back in the process. I love the invitation of, the greatest imaginings on rehumanizing. And I guess there's this question in me of, how do we get back to that? It's like things have been, the system has been created and people have been entrenched, and it has always, it's like there's a note of, it seems like it has always been there. So it seems so challenging to get in this space of reimagining what is possible. So I'm curious to also know, what has worked for you in inviting people back in to this space of imagination.
So I've put in the chat that the person who I know at the moment who is doing the most on imagination is Rob Hopkins. And Sophie's smiling because she's just had him on a podcast, and he's the guy who founded the Transition Network, and he's doing amazing things about imagining the future and bringing imagination back in. So he's got a website and podcasts, and so check that out. Okay, so Skeena, from your end, something very practical where you're seeing this, or very concrete where you're seeing this starting to emerge?
Thank you. So I would look at examples that are inspired by matriculture. I think this is a word you're going to see more and more. Motherism and matriculture and matrifocality. It was, for some anthropologists and historians, it was the original organizing principle of humanity, by and large. It is not an inversion of patriarchy, okay? Really important to understand that. The Gudambashri movement in India, South Kerala, 43 million women have organized in neighborhood parliaments. Gudambashri means the prosperity of the family. And they have organized in sociocratic ways, in decentralized sociocratic ways, for the prosperity of the family, for the socio-economic needs of their families. So there's a concrete example, Chris, that I love.
Could you put something in the chat just so people can Google that as a, yeah. And then for me, I guess I would, because it's the world I operate in, I would look at growing, so food growing systems. I've been absolutely amazed. There is an explosion of young people involved in urban growing, greening urban areas, growing food in cities, regenerative agriculture to replace chemical-based agriculture, permaculture, organics. It is just everywhere in the world. It is exploding, and it's unseen, it's below the radar, but it's people trying to find ways to look at the food system completely differently and to use that as a way to regenerate food systems. And I think it's incredibly inspiring. All right, so let's, just because of time, shall we start to move into breakout groups just to reflect on some of this? Lana, do you want to take us in?
Yes, so we will go in breakout rooms, and we will be in a trio for today so that we'll have more time to share with each other. And looking at the time, we'll have about 7 minutes each to share what is the new story that is unfolding in your organization or in the initiatives that you're part of. What is it that you're birthing? And I also have prepared a Jamboard where before you get into sharing with your partners, with the trio, try to spend a minute, just write down thoughts on, what is the new story that's unfolding in your world, in your life, and what are you birthing? So John, I believe you're our person.
Yes.
For the thoughts.
Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to set up the rooms in such a way that you will be able to exit the room and select another room if it's necessary. Okay. And Lana, do I open the rooms for 20 minutes, did you say?
Yes.
Okay. Good.
Yeah.
Back to you, Chris. Lana, there you
Okay.
go. Thanks so much.
Lana, I think you're going to lead us through.
Thank you. Thank you for my group. I've just learned quite a lot. So I'm curious to also surface what came up in your triad, what came up in your conversations with each other. So anyone who would like to unmute themselves and share snippets of what's emerging or what you heard from others as emerging.
I'll be happy to start. I was with a really interesting group, which included Alexandra Savruk, who is, I think, a dean in a business school in Ukraine. And if there's anything that that is about birthing and changing, it's that situation. So it was momentous to have the opportunity to listen to him. But from my perspective, what I heard was, on the one hand, with the alternative of death, change is the only way. Staying the same isn't an option like it is for most of us. And that change that's going on now, even though they're in a terrible situation, it is the birth of something really extraordinary for the future. And at the same time, when we were comparing with the situation in the United States and the UK, where we're dealing with this polarization due to selfishness primarily, it puts things into context. I don't know if Alexandra wants to add anything, but okay.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Alexandra, for sharing that. And it also connects with what I've heard in my group about, but how do we get people to have a sense of urgency? There's really that question of, but how do we really mobilize and get people engaged? So I'm curious if that there are people who are seeing that there's a new story emerging, and the biggest question is, yeah, how do we get people engaged in that? You know, how do we get them on board? Anyone else from the different groups? What came up in your conversations? Lana?
If I could add, hi, I'm Shikha. I'm from GRLI India. And I had a very good group, a varied group from different countries. And we mainly discussed how, because of the pandemic and after the pandemic, the boundaries have dimmed and how we all have come together. In fact, I was giving my personal example, how I have collaborated with a lot of people. And thanks to Kathleen, because she mentioned that now it's more about co-liberating than collaboration, which is pretty true. So our theme basically was, we were talking about how we've come together and we don't need a leader to push us to take any initiative. We ourselves feel the need to go ahead and do something if we really feel that there's something wrong. So we don't need a push. We are probably, at least I personally feel that I am, and I think it was resonated by Eva as well in the group, and to Kathleen as well. So that's about it.
Thank you, Shikha. It's a powerful reminder of having the agency for change, that we are all resourced for that, and waiting for somebody else to say, oh, here's the change mandate. This is what we have to do, is also something that we can change as a paradigm.
Can add to that.
Yes, Kathleen.
What we had talked about, also I was with Shika and Eva and Laurie, is this coming together, maybe, and I love the term that you use, co-liberation as opposed to collaboration, co-labor, because there is that tension between freedom and structure gives freedom. So what we saw what I was researching, finding that when the leadership void left a gap, who stepped up, we did find individuals. And that relates to even Ava's school, starting with the individual in her story. But what we found was what fuels that ability to step up was not skill-based. It was intent to do it, not just hopefully, or if it works, but intent, it will. And love, hope, and care. And that's like the fuel that keeps it regenerated. And I think we still see around the world these pockets that are still stepping up to do things that we think our governments are just not fulfilling. Ava, I think you should tell about your university, The Power of One. That was a great story.
Thanks, Kathleen, for volunteering me. Okay, so I work for Rotterdam School of Management, and in the group I shared that we adopted this mission to be a force for positive change, and we used the framework of the Sustainable Development Goals a lot to show our students how even they are trained to become a business professional. From whatever field they end up in, they can always make a positive change in the global challenges. But to avoid them from feeling overwhelmed, we also use positive change starts with the power of one. So we try to give them an anchor and say that, hey, the SDGs are wicked and overwhelming. It may very well be that we can never solve them, but that doesn't mean that you cannot give it a go. Because if they are too complicated to be solved, then failure is completely in line with the expectations, which gives you the freedom to try, experiment, learn from your experience, and try again and improve. That's the storyline that we've been trying to build over the past years in our program.
Thank you, Eva. And I know Sandra has been graciously adding a lot of resources in the chat. So I'm wondering if maybe John or Chris, if we can have a document where things are put in for people who might want to revisit it later.
Yeah, I've copied a bunch of them into the Jamboard at the end. There's a page at the end of resources.
We'll save the chat. You'll save the chats as well, so we'll have it.
Right.
And I would like to invite Sandra if you'd want to just put your voice in the field as well. So after all the things that you've shared in the chat, would be nice to also hear your voice.
Thanks, Lana. Not sure what to say. I've put a lot of material into the chat. There's more, but I don't want to overwhelm you. I've been working with Steve Waddell on an initiative called Bounce Beyond for the last couple of years, where we do see this transformational activity emerging in many places around the world. The core idea is to somehow get, because there's not as much power in these many times small and separated initiatives, to try to figure out ways to get them together so that they can align their efforts and build what we call powerful transformation systems collectively and actually deal with the powers that be, which are entrenched interests that really are benefiting from the current system, which is very elite oriented. And these are much more democratically participative, inclusive, globally inclusive initiatives. So it does take the collaborative mindset, all of that, I to me to we, to us, all of us, thinking that John talked about earlier. I don't know if that helps, but that would be the kind of framing in the background that we believe in.
Thank you, Sandra. And I'm now passing it on to Chris. For I don't know if we still have time for a question and answer with Skeena, or a few last words before we close off.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Yes, Skeena, I wonder whether you have a reflection on what you've heard from people or from what happened in the breakout groups, just about this kind of the dynamic of how systems change, or about how we transcend one paradigm when we feel like we're locked in it. So do you have a reflection on that?
No small thing then.
No. Yeah, just give us the answer.
So co-liberation, the way we've described that, means the knowing, the being, and the becoming, that your safety and your freedom and your flourishing depend on mine and mine on yours, and are at once interconnected with the whole web of life. Essentially, what we're talking about is the shift from where we are and the systems we've created in the image of the domination paradigm, the separation paradigm, to that what co-liberation is describing, the knowing, the being, and becoming of that. That's essentially. And what I'm so heartened by, and Sandra, thank you for putting all that in, is that we're all making really important moves as to to describe what that is, and to increase our what I call deep collaboration. I call it deep collaboration in the image of Arne Nace's deep ecology, in the image of Jem Bendel's deep adaptation, right? this sense that what's intrinsic to the collaboration or the collaboration or the co-liberation is that we would notice our deep interconnectedness. It is absolutely where life will spring out and human evolution will spring out from. Arne Nace calls it the need for the comprehensive maturity of all relationships, so that you are in relationship with the mountain. The mountain has personhood. The rivers have personhood, right? You are in relationship with the dandelions and the buddleia and the bees and the streams that flow under you. And you are in relationship with your community. So really, what I'm sensing, Chris, that is happening already, and what I'm hearing from this amazing group is that we're working on it. We've got this. We know we've got to enter into deep collaboration. And yesterday I spoke about, in one of our team meetings, I spoke about the Magna Star. In the vision team, we talked about offering a North Star, and actually where I'm at now is the idea of a Magna Star. And a Magna Star is like an exotic star which has the magnetic force of much. It creates a massive field of attraction and energy. And I think that's the work that what I'm interested in is connecting, is a hyper connection moment of repair and relationship. So whatever you're doing, wherever you are, how are you going to connect and enter into deep collaborations on a global level? And when I say the word global, what I mean by that is that, yes, you need to, this radical localism and is so important for the sovereignty work and the work of creating the new systems. And we have a global responsibility because this is a global, right? It's a global collapse of a paradigm and civilization. So what is that? So in being the change, I'll just give you a kind of concrete strategic intervention is one way of describing it. We're saying, so if you have a resilience or a restoration or a regeneration project and a community of care around that, a community of belonging around that, how about you connect with 2 other communities in the global majority world and you share your learnings. You share 3 things. You share your learnings, you share your stories, your heart, your stories from the heart, and you share resources, right? We had this twinning town thing idea in the UK some while back. It's a manifestation of deep collaboration by creating these global families, these global pods. It's a co-liberation pod, but at a level, at a global human kinship level. And so that's what being the change asking for us to do, to in our work of deep collaboration and superhighway connecting that we're doing, is to hold our brothers and sisters and our kinship and our commitment and our responsibility for the destruction and devastation and the extraction and exploitation of the global majority world.
Bruce, I know, Bruce Goldstein has a lot of information about how this is actually happening in practice in academic communities that are dealing with this. I wonder if there's time for him to say a few words about that.
Yeah, thanks, Sandra. Yeah, I'm working with a group called the Transformations Community. And the idea is to create connections between action researchers and reflective practitioners, focusing particularly on how do you create organizations that enhance the capacity for sustainability transitions and transformations. And so really into the nuts and bolts, like what is the leadership practice? What is the evaluation and assessment protocols that work to make sure you're staying on point? What is the process design? What is the organizational design? And really focusing on ideas around decolonization of knowledge and co-production of knowledge to push back against a conventional notion of scientific knowledge production as something that happens out there in the laboratory. And yeah, I'll just share the link to our group. We have a biannual conference and share a lot of things, newsletters and updates and case studies. And again, it's about connecting practitioners and action researchers together so that they can co-produce usable knowledge to enhance our capacity to do this kind of work. So I'm really excited about that. Excited about all the organizations I've heard on this call. These are examples exactly of what we're trying to understand and partner with.
Great, thank you. Okay, thank you. Lana, do you have a last thought, and then we'll pass back to Skeena to take us out?
Just like on a more practical note, so we'll have another courageous conversation happening in June. And this time we'll have Michelle Holliday with us to share her thoughts around thrivability. So she's the author of The Age of Thrivability. And we're so excited because that is also how we've connected, Chris and I, in taking Michelle's course on the foundations of regeneration. And we would love to have you there and be part of, again, another courageous conversation.
Thank you. Skeena.
Thank you, Chris. When we talk about interbeing, interconnecting, collaboration, there are many subtle forces that make that world up. And there's a whole science there to consider that we are energy. There's Albert Einstein, when he shifted us from Newtonian physics to the physics of relativity and shared subtle forces, the resonance between us, the coherence between us that exists in non-material ways and in invisible ways to the human eye and to the human ear. So that's where this practice is coming from. It also is a practice that has many forms in many ancient cultures, right? So we can call it a heart coherence practice, where we're sharing a field of interconnection, even though we're millions miles away from each other. We can trust that we can create a resonant field together that can inform us and inspire us and strengthen us, nourish us. So all I'm going to do is bring you back to the idea of the children's fire, and from the place of heart, essentially. Now, you may just want to decenter your screen. That you could take this as a number of invitations and sit with where you're comfortable in these invitations. Go back to perhaps what Chris was describing, a connection to something that feels joyous, that feels like you can appreciate it, that you have gratitude for it, and that your senses, your many senses, feel an affinity for or a call towards. And as you do that, we can bring the intention of the children's fire from our full-heartedness for that. And the next invitation is to close your eyes. If you wish to, you can stay at the first invitation. It's up to you. Feeling your own sovereignty in this practice and your own way of being with it. And if you have come to the second invitation around closing your eyes, you can come to a third and place a hand on your heart. You can just stay with eyes closed. You can just stay with your eyes open for something else. And wherever you are now, again, just coming back to the heart and the sensation around the heart, the feeling of the heart, the greatest imaginings of the heart, the full beauty, power, magnificence of the heart in relation to the children's fire, to the service of life force of future generations. And feel your heart for that. Just feel your heart for that. And then in that you can get, and this, the last invitation now is to get a sense of our one-heartedness for that. So the hearts on this call, the hearts in the world that we know, feel this with us, the one-heartedness of the children's fire. And in a sense, we're breathing together as one for this. Breath is life, life is breath. We're breathing with our heart sense for this children's fire. And then when you're ready, we're going to blow this children's fire out so we can open our eyes. Having got that sense, Chris, you can lift the candle up and together we can just blow it out on 3. So 1, 2, 3. Trusting it will go on forevermore. Thank you.
Thank you. So thank you everyone for joining the call. Thank you for contributing to the Jamboard, to your sense of what's being born at this time. Thank you, Skeena, for the practices and the insights. Thank you, Lana, for holding the conversation with me. Thank you to the GRLI, to John, for convening these courageous conversations and for giving us a space to lift ourselves above the kind of day-to-day and to think about the future that we're all hoping and wishing for. So thank you. Thank you all for being here, and I look forward to seeing you again next time for Michelle Halliday talking about thriving organizations and regenerative cultures.
Thank you, everyone.
Have a good day, everyone.
Thank you, Skeena. Thank you, Lana.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Yeah.
Wonderful.